gather round, my dear ones, for tonight I'll tell you a story that's as old as time itself. A tale of gods and heroes, love and betrayal, and a war that shook the heavens and the earth. This is the story of the Trojan War. Now, my dear ones, let me take you back to the very beginning of this grand tale. It all started at a wedding feast, a celebration so magnificent that it seemed the whole world had gathered to rejoice. The mortal King Peleus, a brave and noble man, was marrying the beautiful sea nymph Thetis. Thetis was no ordinary bride, mind you. She was a goddess of the sea, graceful and radiant, and her marriage to Peleus was a union of the mortal and the divine. The wedding was held on Mount Pelion, and the guest list was nothing short of extraordinary. Gods and goddesses from all corners of the heavens were invited. Zeus, the king of the gods, Hera, his queen, Poseidon, the ruler of the seas, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and many more. It was a gathering of the most powerful beings in existence, and the festivities were fit for the gods themselves. But, my dears, there was one guest who was not invited, Eris, the goddess of discord. Now, Eris was known for her mischievous and troublesome nature. She thrived on chaos and strife, and the other gods thought it best to leave her out of the celebration. But Eris, as you might imagine, was not pleased. She felt slighted, and her anger burned like a smoldering ember. So, what did she do? Well, Eris decided to crash the party in her own special way. She didn't storm in or make a scene. No, she was far too clever for that. Instead, she crafted a golden apple, the most beautiful apple anyone had ever seen, and inscribed it with 3 simple words, "To the fairest." Then she rolled it into the banquet hall, right into the midst of the festivities. Now, my dear ones, you can imagine what happened next. The apple gleamed like sunlight, catching the eyes of 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each of them believed she was the fairest, the most beautiful, and each thought the apple was meant for her. Hera, the queen of the gods, claimed it as her rightful prize. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, argued that her beauty was unmatched, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, smiled sweetly and said the apple was clearly hers. The 3 goddesses began to argue, their voices rising like thunder, and soon the entire feast was in an uproar. Zeus, the king of the gods, knew he had to intervene, but he didn't want to make the decision himself. After all, choosing between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite was no small matter. It was a sure way to make enemies. So, Zeus came up with a plan. He called upon a young prince named Paris, the son of King Priam of Troy. Paris was known for his fairness and good judgment, and Zeus believed he was the perfect person to settle the dispute. The 3 goddesses were sent to Paris, who was tending his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida, far from the grandeur of the wedding feast. Each goddess approached Paris and made her case. Hera promised him power and dominion over all of Asia, if he chose her. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in battle. But Aphrodite, the goddess of love, made him an offer he couldn't refuse. She promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Now, Paris was young and impulsive, and the promise of love swayed his heart. He handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, declaring her the fairest of them all. Hera and Athena were furious, and from that moment on, they held a grudge against Paris in the city of Troy. But Aphrodite, true to her word, set the wheels of fate in motion. She helped Paris win the heart of Helen, a decision that would lead to one of the greatest wars in history. Ah, my friends, here's where the story takes a dark and dramatic turn. You see, Helen wasn't just any woman. She was the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Her beauty was so legendary that kings and princes from all over Greece had once competed for her hand in marriage. Menelaus had won her, and their union was meant to bring peace and stability to the region. But when Paris, swayed by Aphrodite's promise, took Helen to Troy, it wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was an act of war. Menelaus was furious, and rightly so. His honor had been trampled, his home violated, and his wife taken from him. But Menelaus wasn't alone in his anger. His brother Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, saw this as an opportunity to unite the Greek kingdoms under a common cause. Agamemnon was a man of ambition, and he knew that avenging this insult would cement his legacy as a leader. Together, the brothers vowed to bring Helen back and punish Troy for its arrogance. But this wasn't a task for just two men. No, my dears, this required an army of heroes. Agamemnon called upon the greatest warriors of Greece, and what a gathering it was. There was Achilles, the invincible hero, said to be the son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus. Achilles was unmatched in battle, his strength and speed the stuff of legend. Then there was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, a man whose cunning and wit were as sharp as any sword. And let's not forget Ajax, a giant of a man, whose sheer size and strength made him a force to be reckoned with. These heroes, along with countless others, answered the call. They gathered at Aulis, a port city, and prepared a fleet of over 1,000 ships. Imagine that, my little ones, 1,000 ships, their sails billowing in the wind, ready to carry the might of Greece to the distant shores of Troy. It was an armada unlike anything the world had ever seen. But the journey to Troy was not destined to be easy. The gods, it seemed, were not entirely on their side. When the fleet was ready to set sail, the winds refused to blow. The ships sat motionless in the harbor, and the warriors grew restless. The seer Calchas, a man who could interpret the will of the gods, revealed the reason for their misfortune. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, was angry with Agamemnon. Some say he had offended her by boasting that he was a greater hunter than she. Others say it was because he had killed a sacred deer. Whatever the reason, Artemis demanded a terrible price to calm the winds. Agamemnon was faced with an impossible choice. To appease Artemis, he had to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. Can you imagine, my dears, the weight of such a decision? Agamemnon was a king, a leader, but he was also a father. Yet, in his ambition to lead the Greeks to victory, he made the unthinkable choice. He sent for Iphigenia, telling her she was to be married to Achilles. When she arrived, she was met not with a wedding, but with an altar. The sacrifice was carried out, and the winds began to blow. The fleet set sail, but the cost was immense. Agamemnon's decision haunted him for the rest of his life, and it sowed the seeds of tragedy for his family. His wife, Clytemnestra, never forgave him, and her anger would one day lead to a bloody reckoning. And so, my dear ones, the Greeks set off for Troy, driven by honor, ambition, and the desire for revenge. But the gods had already shown that this war would not be without sacrifice. the stage was set for a conflict that would last 10 long years, a war that would test the courage, loyalty, and humanity of all who fought in it. The Greeks had arrived at Troy, their 1,000 ships lining the shores, their warriors ready for battle. But Troy was no ordinary city. Its walls were high and strong, built by the gods themselves, and its people were fierce and determined. For 10 long years, the Greeks laid siege to Troy, but the Trojans, led by their noble prince Hector, held their ground. Hector was everything a hero should be, brave, honorable, and devoted to his family and city. He was the heart of Troy, the shield that protected his people. Day after day, the Greeks attacked, and day after day, the Trojans repelled them. The war was brutal, my dears, with neither side able to gain the upper hand. The fields outside Troy ran red with blood, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the plains. But then something happened that changed everything. Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior, quarreled with Agamemnon. Now, Achilles was no ordinary man. He was the son of a goddess, Thetis, and a mortal king, Peleus. His strength and skill in battle were unmatched, and the Greeks relied on him to turn the tide of the war. But Achilles had a temper, and when Agamemnon took away his war prize, a captive woman named Briseis, Achilles' pride was wounded. "I will not fight for you," Achilles declared, and he withdrew to his tent. Without him, the Greeks were like a ship without a sail. They suffered terrible losses, and the Trojans, emboldened by Achilles' absence, pushed the Greeks back to their ships. Hector led the charge, his courage inspiring his men, and it seemed as though Troy might finally triumph. But then, tragedy struck. Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend and companion, could not bear to see the Greeks suffer. He begged Achilles to return to battle, but when Achilles refused, Patroclus took matters into his own hands. He put on Achilles' armor, hoping to rally the Greeks and strike fear into the Trojans. For a time, it worked. The Greeks, thinking Achilles had returned, fought with renewed vigor, and the Trojans were driven back. But Hector, ever the brave and cunning warrior, saw through the ruse. He confronted Patroclus on the battlefield, and in a fierce and tragic duel, Hector struck him down. Patroclus' death was a blow not just to the Greeks, but to Achilles himself. When Achilles learned of his friend's death, his grief was immeasurable. He wept, he raged, and he vowed to avenge Patroclus no matter the cost. Achilles returned to battle, his heart burning with fury. He sought out Hector, and the two warriors clashed in a duel that would decide the fate of the war. Hector fought bravely, but he was no match for Achilles in his rage. Achilles slew Hector, and in a moment of dark triumph, tied the body to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy. It was a terrible sight, my dears, a reminder of how war can twist even the noblest hearts. Achilles, once a hero, had become a vessel of vengeance, his grief and anger consuming him. And Hector, the protector of Troy, was gone, leaving his city vulnerable and his family heartbroken. Now, my dear ones, here's where the story takes a turn. A twist so clever and so daring that it's remembered even thousands of years later. After 10 long years of war, the Greeks were exhausted. They had fought bravely, but Troy's walls still stood strong, and its people remained defiant. It seemed as though the war would never end. But then Odysseus, the king of Ithaca and the cleverest of all the Greeks, had an idea. He realized that Troy could not be taken by force alone. No, they needed a trick, a plan so unexpected that the Trojans would never see it coming. And so, Odysseus devised the most famous stratagem in all of history, the Trojan horse. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, so large that it could hold dozens of warriors inside. They hollowed out its belly and filled it with their best fighters, including Odysseus himself. Then they left the horse at the gates of Troy as a gift, a supposed offering to the gods to ensure their safe journey home. The rest of the Greek army pretended to sail away, their ships disappearing over the horizon. The Trojans, seeing the Greeks gone and the giant horse standing before their gates, were overjoyed. They believed the war was finally over, that the Greeks had given up and left them in peace. But not everyone was convinced. Some, like the priest Laocoon, warned against bringing the horse inside the city. "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," he cried. But his warnings went unheeded. The Trojans, eager to celebrate their victory, dragged the horse inside their walls. They spent the night feasting and rejoicing, their guard lowered for the first time in 10 years. But as the city slept, the Greek warriors hidden inside the horse crept out. They opened the gates of Troy, and the Greek army, which had secretly returned under cover of darkness, poured into the city. What followed was a night of horror, my dears. The Greeks, fueled by years of pent-up rage and frustration, showed no mercy. They slaughtered the Trojans, burned their homes, and enslaved those who survived. The streets of Troy ran with blood, and the once proud city was reduced to ashes. Helen, the woman whose beauty had sparked the war, was found in the palace. Menelaus, her husband, had sworn to kill her for her betrayal, but when he saw her face, his anger melted away. He took her back, and the two returned to Sparta, though their reunion was far from happy. The Greeks had won, but their victory came at a great cost. Many heroes never made it home. Achilles, the greatest of them all, had been killed by an arrow to his heel, his only vulnerable spot. Ajax, the mighty warrior, took his own life in a fit of madness, and Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks, was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra upon his return. Even Odysseus, the mastermind behind the Trojan horse, faced a long and perilous journey home. His voyage, filled with monsters, storms, and temptations, would become the stuff of legend. And so, my dear ones, the Trojan War ended, but its legacy lives on. It's a story of love and loss, of bravery and folly, and of the gods who played with mortal lives like pieces on a chessboard. It reminds us that even the greatest of heroes are human, and that every choice we make can change the course of history. Now, if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I bring more such stories to life. Until next time, my dears, dream big and stay curious.